A very good morning to all our fellow viewers. Thank you so much for joining us today on a special edition on this special day here, the 12th of August 2023, which is the election day. My name is Meor Addelan and you're now watching a special edition of our show State Polls 2023. Power to the people. As mentioned, today is that sacred day. It is that penultimate day where people will be flocking. They will be going out to all of the polling stations all across 6 states in Malaysia to cast their vote to elect who will be in power for their respective states. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, let me give you a bit of a refresher of what has actually been going on. It has been declared in July, the nomination date back in the 29th of July, where all of the the people who are contesting for these posts for the state elections have been going out, and the early voting has also been implemented earlier on the 8th of August. And this, as mentioned, is about the 6 states that are in question. We're talking about Kelantan, Negeri Sembilan, Kedah, Selangor, Terengganu, and Penang. Now, these 6 states, if you may have remembered, were not included during the GE 2015, that was GE 2022 that has happened last year, because they have extended their parliamentary seats for each particular states, and now all the seats are now up for grabs. And as mentioned, there are going to be about 9 million people, registered voters out there, who will be exercising their rights to show their support, to show who will they be choosing for their each respective states. And to go more in depth about what is going to happen throughout the whole day today and what has happened within these past 2 weeks during the campaigning sessions, we have 2 very, very distinguished guests together with us to talk about this, more in depth about the whole temperature, the whole sentiment, and everything about this state election. We have in the studio, on my left, we have Dr. O. A. Sun, the Principal Advisor at the Pacific Research Centre of Malaysia, and also the Senior Fellow at Singapore Institute of International Affairs. Dr. O, nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with all of you.
All right, and also together with him, we have Dr. Bridget Welsh, who is currently an honorary research associate with the University of Nottingham, Asia Research Fellow, Institute of Malaysia, based in Kuala Lumpur. Dr. Bridget Welsh, how are you?
Fine, very much. Thank you very much.
Very good. Very interesting, both of our guests here, because again, if you have been scouring all of the medias out there, may it be podcasts, may it be articles, they have been very, very active in putting out their own opinions, voicing out their own concerns of what is to happen during this state election season. And maybe we can start off with something very simple. Let's start with Dr. O. How has the campaigning been? Because truthfully, from my point of view, at least, looking at how it has been for the past 2 weeks, being a PJ person myself, I didn't see much happening at my area. Is it just because at my area there's not many hot seats around, hence why it is a bit of a quiet, calmer state in comparison to any other places?
Well, I think they are the so-called charamas, which are the bigger campaign events with a lot of the heavyweight leaders speaking and so on. But then there are also these so-called jelajas. These are more like going into the various kampongs, going to the various pasar malams and so on. And they are very tactical about doing this. If they are expecting a big crowd, then they will do charama. Okay. If they feel like they perhaps would not get such a big crowd, it's not nice to have like empty seats in your screens, right? So then they would do jelajas, shaking hands, and holding babies and so on. So I think they are doing this more tactically than before, where you have these mega rallies with all these heavyweights just going on stage. There's still some of it, but with, shall we say, beforehand or before the event expectation that there will be a big turnout.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I mean, like, Bridget, if I may call you Bridget,
please.
I mean, looking at all these places, that's what Dr. has actually mentioned. You know, you look at some hot key areas, some key battles that we are expecting to see. For instance, N16 Sungai Tua, Selangor, where the Pakatan Harapan candidate Datuk Sri Amiruddin, I mean, a lot of commotions happening there. We also have big, huge events down in such places. For instance, Gombak Setia as well, where Datuk Megat Zulkarnain is also contesting there, especially talking about Hulu Selangor N18. Nobody is definitely going to miss this area where it's going to be a fight one-on-one between Perikatan Nasional's candidate Datuk Sri Azmin versus Pakatan's candidate Juwairia. It's about being smart about this. It's about picking and choosing the best way possible to get to the rakyat and to convince them of what each candidate can deliver, isn't it?
So going back to the first question, I want to say that the other part of the campaigning that's different now, and what we saw this in G15, is that a lot of the campaign is taking place on your handphone, TikTok, right?
Sure.
And so therefore, these 3 seats that you're talking about on the eastern part of Selangor, you mentioned Ulu Selangor, but it's actually Ulu Klang.
Ulu Klang.
Ulu Selangor is in the north.
There you go.
The seat that's Kursi Panas up there is Ulu Bernam. But but Ulu Klang, what you see is kind of what's going to determine the outcome are the level of people that come out to vote today, as well as the ability at the last minute for people to be pushed on things like TikTok. People aren't going to the Chirama. It's really just loyal supporters that are going to the Chirama compared to the Basque.
Sure.
And especially younger people. So it's the engagement of younger people through other means. And these 3 seats are important. Selangor as a whole, it is 56 seats. It favors the incumbent government to stay, but there are at least 20 seats that are quite competitive, and I think we can see those seats that are going to be determined by how many people come out and whether or not Perikatan Nasional is able to use their sentiments, or whether or not people will be able at the state level government to actually say, let's vote, keep the state back in power.
Yeah, I mean, we have definitely, come to a point in life where Chiramas, all of this on the road, meet up with people kind of thing, that is still being done. But more concentration, as what Bridget has actually mentioned, Dr. O, is all about engaging with those on the fence voters out there who still don't know who it is to choose from. So meaning that the only way to get to these kind of people is through social media, is through online engagement. And the campaigning behind that has been massive. It has been huge. If you're looking at all your social media platforms, your Facebook, your Twitter, your Threads, your TikTok, so on and so forth, that is the way to go now, isn't it? I mean, like throughout all parties, for sure.
Well, I think on the Pakatan side, it's about eliciting their voters out to vote, because if they were to come out to vote, the likelihood is, of course, they will vote heavily in favor of Pakatan Harapan, and also by extension, because Barisan Nasional is now Pakatan's coalition partner in the federal government. So therefore, they will also vote for this BN candidates where there are no Pakatan candidates. So it's more about mobilizing your existing supporters to come out. I think in terms of fence sitters, there are perhaps some. I'm not sure whether you could still sort of convince them to make a choice in your favor, or the other side, of course, in their favor, and so on. I think it's more about mobilizing your voters to come out at this point. On the other hand, if you are Barisan supporters, I'm not quite sure even if you come out, you're going to vote for the coalition partners in Pakatan. Or would you instead transfer your vote to perhaps PAS or even Bersatu? So for on the BN side, sort of mobilizing their so-called supporters to come out to vote, it may or may not work in their favors.
No, because funny you should mention that, because again, for the longest time, we're talking about previous GEs before, we have been so used to the fact that you knew who BN was and who are the people behind Barisan Nasional. You got the likes of UMNO, you got MCA, you got MIC. But now with Pakatan Harapan, you have the emergence of obviously the Pakatan Harapan candidates together with DAP as well. And that's a bit confusing to some because with whatever that has been going on previously, all the words that have been thrown out, all the commotions and all the controversies, but now it's all about, now I'm partnering with this guy. That's just confusing to the voters, isn't it, Bridget?
Yeah, it's very much so. I mean, I think, this issue of crossover vote or transferability is actually really being tested today, right, on multiple levels. So we're going to see, a lot of Pakatan Harapan voters who have, for decades opposed UMNO have to vote for UMNO in this election. And, I already have seen on Twitter some reactions like, I voted for UMNO for the first time in my life. And they're having a bit of, post voting for UMNO shock among Pakatan Harapan supporters. And then there's the opposite, right, where I think we're seeing more crossover from Pakatan Harapan to UMNO generally, but from the other side, from UMNO to vote for Pakatan Harapan, I think there's kind of a gradation. They might consider PKR, they might consider Amana, but they haven't crossed that red line of DAP, all right, for most of the voters, right? And so I think that particular crossover, and for them, it's not only shock, it's also a kind of sense of, what am I doing, right? There's a kind of you're not sure. And I think it's not just in Selangor. We saw these sentiments in Negeri Sembilan, and we also see some of that in Penang as well.
Yeah, sure. Again, what history has taught us, again, understanding all of this, party collisions and the partnership that has been built up. It's sort of like seasonal kind of thing, whatever it is that they can do to get the best out of their own party. But truth be told, I just want to ask you, Doc, is that the Malay voters themselves nowadays, let's just talk about this, because you can't run away from sentiments at the end of the day, because there are players out there, there are candidates out there who thrives on these sentiment issues. The Malays for the Malays, the Chinese for the Chinese, so on and so forth. But speaking on the Malays' point of view, the fact that they have been so used to having this partnership, having this trust for UMNO, and that is confusing for them. Again, as mentioned, now you have to vote another party, which that for 20, 30, 40 years, saying that, no, these are the bad guys. But now, no, they're our partners. We can go forward together. It's, again, confusing bit.
I think 2 points. Number one, I think Pakatan, over the last few general elections, they did a very good job of saying UMNO has done a lot of very negative things and so on, scandals-ridden, and therefore should not support UMNO. I think this convinced a lot of voters, both Malays and non-Malays. The non-Malays would then almost automatically cast their vote for Pakatan, whereas perhaps the Malay mind is slightly more nuanced, right? There are some who, of course, then voted for PKR and even DAP. I think a lot of them, even though they might not like UMNO anymore, they would not feel comfortable voting for a coalition or parties which are rooting for, let's say, multiculturalism or what they perceive as liberalism and so on. So if you don't like UMNO and you're not comfortable with Pakatan, perhaps then your choice is, not quite Bersatu, so perhaps your choice would be PAS, because, PAS supposedly represents not the puritanical, the purer side of the political spectrum from some perspective. So that's number one. Number two, I think, because in this country, the religious and the racial narratives are sort of clammed into one. So I think sometimes it's easy to sort of mix these racial sentiments like Malay supremacy and so on with the religious sentiments, the yearning for more spiritual attainment and so on. But I think these two things, while they are intermixed, I think there are also nuances. There are those, for example, the Dr. Mahathir's and perhaps what is this, Bersatu, which are championing so-called Malay rights, Malay rights have eroded and so on. But PAS, on the other hand, while they are still, they are also venturing into this Malay rights and so on, but still the message is a decidedly religious one, it's a decidedly spiritual one, which some might even say is somewhat in tune with what's going on in the region, if not in most other Muslim majority countries. There's some sort of revivalism of the political Islam going on, and PAS is riding on that.
You're shaking your head there, Bridget.
I disagree with my friend Isan. And I think that PAS and Perkara Nasional, with working with Bersatu, they have a different narrative than the past. It's, yes, religion is extremely important, and Islamization and a conservative interpretation of the faith is there. But I would also suggest that they have messed this with Malay nationalism. That's what I call the neo-Malay nationalist narrative. So what's going on this election, and what we saw in GE15 and in this state polls, is how Bersatu, working with PAS, is able to take over the leadership or the position of being the representation of the Malay community. So there is a ethno-nationalist element that is intertwined together in their narrative. And so, you know, you're voting not just for the faith, but you're also voting for the Malay community and for the leadership of the Malay community. That's the narrative that has been pushed down to the ground. So I think the racialized dimension is very strong, but it is one that is intertwined with religion. And that's why you're seeing Perkara Nasional gaining in the polls, because now, instead of GE15, where they had previously been in the government, right, and have responsibility of being in the government, now they're the opposition. So they're able to capitalize on economic discontent, as well as use this racialized narrative, which combines race and religion together.
Yeah. Anything to rebut on that?
Well, as I said, they're intertwined. It's just that I guess we place more emphasis on the different perspectives.
Yeah, but there's no running away from the fact that the whole chaos that was created only about a couple of months ago about this conversation about 3R, race, religion, and royalty, it has been the talk of the town. A lot of people, they have been using this as an ammunition, especially politicians going out, again, parading out there like, you know, Malays are for Malays, we are Muslims, and we are, you know, under the guidance of the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, so on and so forth. To what extent do you think that this 3R played its role until today for these 6 state elections? What do you think, Bridget?
So first of all, I think Pakatan Harapan and Barisan Nasional did not really attack Perkara Nasional. To the same degree that we've seen in previous campaigns.
All right.
And I think in part because Perkara Nasional has been, PN has been so intertwined with race and religion that an attack on them was almost being perceived as an attack on race and religion in that regard. So I think that this will be something that when we see the results come, Pakatan Harapan will have to look more carefully to see how they used, what type of attack they didn't use in the campaign. Second of all, I think that Perkara Nasional did not need to openly state their racialized dimensions in the campaign because it was pretty well established. It was well established from GE15, and it was implicit, right? The messaging that was being sent, right? You know, and in some places it was sent. You said, you know, you vote for us, you go to heaven, right? You vote for us. You know, we want the outsiders to go away. I mean, there were posters like this in this campaign as well, but I think it was much more of a kind of unspoken known in the way the campaign operated. And then, of course, the third side of it is that the non-Malay communities, the Chinese and the Indian, know and were very, this campaign, it was very salient, the sense of being included or being excluded. And, you know, one of the challenges Perkara Nasional faces is they have very little non-Malay support. But also, many non-Malays felt that the other parties and the other coalitions were also not necessarily engaging them to the same degree as the past.
Right. So just within that topic itself, when we talk about the 3R conversation, is it a necessity for any parties out there to actually exercise, you know, this point? Is it actually encouraged, or is it something that you really need to find the finest line ever to make sure that you're in the right rather than going overboard? What do you think, Dr.
I think Pakatan Harapan tried to, in a sense, skirt this a little bit by emphasizing a lot of socio-economic issues, what are the kind of, well, at the more macro level type of socio-economic policies that they are rolling out and that they will be rolling out if they were re-elected and so on. I think we will see to what extent this sort of, well, I don't know, avoidance of the 3R issues by substituting it with these socio-economic concerns, to what extent that would work, I think we will see later today. But I think just like Bridget mentioned, that Pakatan did not go all out in attacking, let's say, Perikatan in terms of these 3R issues and so on, because the other side, it's become so much enmeshed with at least the 2Rs, right? So, but I think they're laying the groundwork a little bit, just like before, they were painting UMNO to be, well, corrupt and full of scandals and so on. So over the past few months, you also saw some sort of, you know, like the scandals being revealed, you know, major figures on the other side somewhat implicated and so on. So it's sort of laying the groundwork for that. But of course, perhaps it's not in time for this this round of state elections. As for the non-Malays, I think, well, it's like voting for UMNO with tears, right? But still you vote for UMNO.
Okay.
A lot are not coming out because they felt like, well, they've been voting consistently for Pakatan over the last few general elections, and yet Pakatan has been in government twice. This is second round now, and yet the kind of the so-called more equal treatment type of policies have not been rolled out and so on. So, but they could not, of course, bring themselves to vote for Perikatan. And as a result, quite a number of them may stay home. And that's what Pakatan worries as well.
Yeah, please.
You know, Isan is making a really important point, and that is this election is going to be very much determined by turnout. You know, we see, you know, I was in Gombak Setia and U Klang this morning before coming here and drove through, also stopped by Batu Tiga next to this studio, right? You can see the voter turnout is slower than GE15. And it's palpable, right? And so therefore you wonder what the numbers are going to be from the overall, especially because people who are the core party supporters often vote in the morning. They're the ones to, especially elderly, they like to get up and have done it and then have a nice breakfast afterwards, a good roti canai or something, right? So, but we see as a situation where it's a particular dynamic that is going to shape the outcome. And, you know, we also have still quite a few people who are undecided. And there are particular groups that are undecided voters. We see a lot of young voters that are not sure if they want to come out, right? You know, let's be real that the government and both major coalitions haven't reached out to young people. And while MUDA has done, I think, a very dynamic campaign, especially on social media and been very pro-reform, they're not contesting everywhere, and they had unevenness in some of their candidates. So therefore, this helped that. So young voters, and I think the other group that I hear a lot are undecided are women. They're not sure. I mean, I met a Gombak Setia voter yesterday, and she was asked, you know, in Gombak Setia, and she said, "I'm not sure if who I'm going to vote for." And we had a long conversation about what were the different reasons.
Yeah, I do want to touch about the MUDA aspect of this, but before that, this has just came in, actually. The EC has actually announced that voters turnout across all 6 states, we are looking at between 17% to 22%.
Wow, very low.
Truth be told, this number's in comparison to how it was in GE15, which was only a few months ago, half a year ago.
At least 30%,
right? At least 30%.
Yes.
And again, Bridget, coming back to you, is it just, as what you said, some people out there, they just don't feel like going out because of what they've witnessed previously and what they are foreseeing, what's to happen? Their vote don't count, hence why they're not going out. What do you think the sentiments are there?
I don't think it's a big issue of their vote not counting. I think Malaysians know that their votes count, that these races are competitive. They know that. They're informed on these areas. But more, they don't like the choices. Right? You know, they're unhappy with the choices. You know, either it be the candidate or the parties. You know, so you have a choice to vote for Pakatan National or Pakatan Harapan. And many voters that have voted for Pakatan Harapan with working now with BN have a little bit more reluctance of wanting to come out. And I think that, it's a different group. Let's take, for example, Indian Malaysians. Many of them feel that, they're being excluded, and that unfortunate viral video of the young student, it had an emotional sentiment for some Indian Malaysians.
Sure.
And I'm expecting that voter turnout from among some Indian Malaysians will be lower, for example.
And exactly, as what Bridget has actually mentioned, Dr. O, is that sentiment of not having the best candidate on hand. And even if you want to vote within the party itself, sometimes it's so confusing. You don't even like the person who's heading the party, for instance. And it is such a conundrum. It is such a headache. It is such a problem for anyone to actually think of before casting that ballot.
Well, it's exactly that sort of unhappiness with the existing choices, which, shall we say, benefited or which gave rise to muda, or I would call the muda phenomenon, right? That you have very fresh and very often professional candidates, and it's not just young candidates. There are some who are more advanced in age and so on. But you see these people as being responsible figures. They have they have various accomplishments in their professional careers and so on, and yet they are willing to present themselves. But I think this muda phenomenon or movements, it needs perhaps a slightly more structure. It needs clearer messages, clearer, more concerted, more consistent messages. It needs to have, for example, more than just Syed Saddiq being the main attraction, being the most charismatic leaders, and so it needs to have a few of Syed Saddiqs, and also it needs to improve perhaps its mobilization machinery. Right now, it's a bit like Pakatan of old, namely depending a lot on volunteers to come out to help out, to set up the charamas and so on. But at some point, well, this being a developing country, at some point you need resources, you need money to do the mobilization.
Yeah, is that what it is, Bridget? Because at the end of the day, I mean, like we're talking about Muda over here. They're the ones who are promoting equality. They are the ones who are promoting, everybody getting that chance across all across all levels, and they want to show that it's possible through Syed Saddiq and through Muda. But there's also another thought to it. On the flip side, people are saying that, these guys, they want to contest, but unfortunately, they don't have money. They're begging people to sponsor their campaign. They're scouring to the ends of the earth to make sure that they have enough resources, what Dr. O has actually mentioned, for them to be relevant still within the political scene in Malaysia. What are your thoughts about that?
I think there are a few points here. Number one, Muda is being held to a higher standard than ever other political parties, right? So when one of its candidates made a comment that was, I think, inappropriate, and its members began to feed in, social media space started to condemn them at a much higher level than we would have seen for other candidates. And keep in mind, all of the political parties make foolish comments in some of the candidates. So one is it's a higher standard. Number two, I think that what we have seen in this campaign is Muda has featured a whole range of younger people. So I do think one of the things that will come out of this campaign afterwards is that we're not just seeing the Syed Saddiq. We have not only Amira in Johor, but we see people like Dobi Chu, who is contesting in Sri Sitya, for example. So we see a combination of different types of leaders. Number three, we have to recognize that Malaysia is a very fragmented place. We spoke earlier about ethnic polarization in the society, and I think this is going to come very clear in the voting patterns. But we also have ideological differences. And what Muda is doing is that it's positioning itself on the more progressive spectrum. And for Pakatan Harapan in particular, this is the reason they attacked it, because Pakatan Harapan almost is dealing with the fact that they, for decades they promoted reformasi, and they have a government where they're working with the person that they challenged.
Yeah.
And so therefore the capacity to engage in reformasi is somewhat curtailed, or should we say significantly curtailed, especially on issues of corruption when the deputy prime minister is right next to the prime minister, right? And there's these types of issues. So I think that the question is, how much progressive space is there ideologically within Malaysia to build on, right?
Yeah.
And then final point that I would raise is that, MUD is a young party. And young people are treated very badly in this country politically. They're not given spaces in parties. It's tokenism. The voices of young people are dismissed, unfortunately. And, you have young students being spoken to in particular ways. Right? You have a situation where, they're 30% of the electorate. And, if they're asking to beg for resources, which I believe that they're not, they ask for resources, which all parties do. I think that, they're looked down on. And I think one of the things that, as Malaysia is becoming more normalized in its elections and candidates are being seen as more ordinary, we see a situation where this youth movement and youth power and youth parties is transformative. I think this is a first step from a perspective of coming out. So I agree with Isan that a lot needs to be done, but my own view is that we're seeing a combination of a new party coming in, but also the challenges of a society that doesn't give space for younger people or doesn't recognize the unique challenges that younger people face. And I think this is evolving in very interesting ways. We won't see it in the numbers in the election, but what happens in campaigns is not necessarily the results. It's how the narratives and how the perceptions of politics is changing.
All right. So, okay, let's change gears a bit. We'll be talking a bit more about Selangor over here. Let's jump to our neighboring state, which is Negeri Sembilan. Now, this question is for you. On the record, I think you have actually dealt, or should I say, given out your opinions in regards to Negeri Sembilan and the forecast, your forecast at least of what is to happen, which party would prevail coming down here. The fact that the Pakatan Harapan BN coalition already has 3 nominations for the Menteri Besar, if I'm not mistaken. So is that just wishful thinking, or is that just being over-prepared? Or do you think that they will take the state on?
Well, any coalition, of course, there will be internal power struggle, and then different parties or even different factions within the party would like to have their leader to be the future MB and so on. But I think in Negeri Sembilan, while both BN and Pakatan remain quite formidable, it is likely that PM will make a bit of inroads. I think the yardstick is not quite whether they could sort of wrest the state government from the PH and BN side. Rather, for example, they could break the 2/3 majority in the state assembly and so on. If they could do so, not only in Negeri Sembilan, but let's say in Selangor and even Penang, that's quite a significant victory already.
All right. What do you think, Bridget, apart from the nas durians that you have had down in Negeri Sembilan? How do you think things are going to be down there?
Well, I always recommend that people try durian everywhere in Malaysia, and I recommend the durian in Jelebu, and also in Bahau as well. I won't continue to list places in Negeri Sembilan, but what I would say is that when I first started looking at the election a few months back and going to the field, Negeri Sembilan I had a perception would be the safest place, right? And what's happened is the opposite. It has become one of the most competitive. And in the 36 seats that we see there, I would say, at least 15 of them are quite competitive.
Okay.
Places like Kelawang, Sekamat, Ampangan, Juase, even places like Gemas, Gemenche. You see a new type of dynamic that is taking place in that state. And so there are 2 different focal points that I've emphasized in my podcast, Kursi Panas, covering some of these seats. And that is, number 1, is we have a challenge to the adat system in Negeri Sembilan. Right? So Bersatu is trying to come in and to offset UMNO. And you can see this in places and seats like Dwase, right, where they fielded a very charismatic candidate, the son of Rice Yatim, Danny Rice, against two very older candidates. One is who's the incumbent, Bakri Sawyer, as well as an independent. So we have a kind of interesting type of dynamic that's taking place. And the younger voters are going to be very crucial. And that goes back to whether or not they'll vote and go back to vote, right? So, and it's an attempt by Bersatu, which I think is very weak machinery in Negri Sembilan, to try to offset and to make the connections to the society to be accepted in a place that has a very different, unique sense of identity. They speak about orang kita in a different way, right? And then the second dynamic is the kind of the border areas, places where there are a lot of outsiders. So the seat, for example, that I think PN has a chance of winning is Pagan Pinang, for example, which is it's right near Port Dickson. But it has a large military camp, and 30% of the electorate is military voters, right? And we saw the turnout for military and security forces almost at 90%. I think they set the example that I'm not sure the rest of Malaysians are going to follow, but we see a situation that is happening there, and so we have kind of that kind of Malay dynamic that's happening about the Semanga, the spirit that PN is capitalizing on. And for UMNO, this state is extremely important. This will be their fortress. This will be the place that they will try to save face where they might lose elsewhere. And so the competition is fierce to these forces. And PAS has only ever won one seat in Negri Sembilan, and that was in Lenggeng in 2008. So we see a situation where it's a very interesting dynamic. A lot of the seats are close to call. The infighting within the unity government about who will become the chief minister, and also the standing of different parties is also at play. So it's an exciting place to watch.
Definitely.
Not just to go for the durian.
Not just to go for the durian. Obviously, apart from PD, where you can actually enjoy your holidays, because it is definitely one of these states to watch across the 6 states. Quick one. Penang, foregone conclusion, we don't have to talk about it, or is Penang interesting enough?
Well, let's put it this way. DAP is contesting 19 out of 40 seats. That's not quite a majority
quite so.
yet. And assuming the DAP wins all of its seats, it's only 19 seats. So it still needs its partner parties, the PKRs and so on, to sort of pull through to win back the state government. So a lot depends on whether, for example, PKR could indeed pull through. And then, of course, there are various sentiments on the islands versus those on the mainland and so on.
I mean, because if you want to look at the 3 other states, for instance, you got the likes of Kelantan, Kedah. It is very Perikatan national driven, obviously, with the presence of PAS there, Kelantan especially. It's been forever since UMNO or even Barisan Nasional before trying to get a foot in that state, but it's never been able to do so. It's always been a challenge for them. Any different outcome you see this time around as well, Bridget?
Well, I came up with my predictions, which are available on Malaysia Kini yesterday for the election. But my Kelantanese friends send me lots of messages because, I only gave the opposition a chance of winning in a few seats. But one of the things that's happening is that, PAS has held power for 33 years in that state. And what we see is that there is a leadership battle taking place within PAS. And that has now, at the last minute, kind of stirred some issues and resentments against potentially a change in the leadership and who that choice has been. And that particularly Nick Amar is being favored for potentially taking over. So, politics take different forms. It's not just about the different coalitions. Terengganu is also, very dynamic, but dynamic in a very different way, in the sense that the PAS government, I think, is extremely popular, and that's not the case in Kelantan. Kelantan is about the fact that they don't have choices, and the opposition is weaker. In the case of Terengganu, I think that we've seen that the PAS government has really garnered a lot of support through their social policies, and UMNO has not rejuvenated with old leaders. So we can see, like in seats like in Kijal, where Ahmed Said is contesting, we will have a different type of, it'll be a kind of rejection of UMNO, potentially, if he loses, which I think is most likely to happen, but we'll see what happens. Also, it goes back voter turnout. But and Kedah, of course, has been the frontline conversation, emphasis on Sanusi, who has been in the news for many different reasons. But what I would say is that PAS being in government, the incumbent government, has helped them to develop that social links. And the attacks on Sanusi and his grounding, his use of state nationalism, this idea of greater Kedah, has really, I think, empowered him. I think we're going to see some losses for Pakatan Harapan and UMNO in that state. I don't think UMNO, their campaign slogan, Ini Kali Sama, was, yang orang tak pilih yang sama ya. so it's not, so it's not they want something different. And, so I think it advantages the PAS government there.
All right. Your take on this?
Well, to what extent this sort of support for PAS and for Sanusi would sort of fall over to Penang, I think would also be quite interesting. I think Rizal American is contesting in a seat very nearby Kedah.
Yeah. So the whole area is in the north.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So a seat like that, whether he could, for example, hold on to a seat like that, I think would be also a testament as to whether this sort of sentiment is quote unquote infiltrating into Penang. But I think this round, whether it's Selangor, whether it's Penang, DAP is really not taking it lightly. I mean, even though they won with overwhelming majorities in previous both state and federal elections, I think they are campaigning quite hard, even in, shall we say, majority non-Malay constituencies. So I saw, for example, in Selangor, this Jamaria, hers should be, I mean, in ordinary circumstances, quite a safe seat. But her father, my good friend Jamaluddin Ibrahim, also, in a sense, was rooting for her. So, and they might have different opinions on politics. So it's nothing is taken for granted in this election.
Hence why it's actually called politics at the end of the day. We're almost running out of time here, but I do want to get it on record. Your predictions of all these 6 states. Who wants to give it a go first?
Well,
there you go.
I think the best case scenario for the unity government side would be, of course, still remaining 3 versus 3.
Yep.
But it's very likely with the PN side denting, if not just breaking the 2/3 majority in these 3 Pakatan states.
All right. Okay. So you're looking at 3-3 draw. What about you, Bridget?
I also say 3-3, and of course we're going to have I expect that they will, in Kedah, they will win the 2/3 for PAS, and I think there will be good gains for PAS in the Malay heartland states of Kedah, Terengganu, and Kelantan. I'm looking at whether or not the 2/3 will be broken in the other 3 states for Pakatan Harapan. But I think the issue will be the composition of the government afterwards, in terms of being able, and the competency of people being able to govern, the changing patterns of the opposition politics. At the end of the day, it's not just about the candidates, it's about what people are going to do when they get into their jobs, to whether or not they're going to help Malaysians in a meaningful way. And I think we'll be looking at questions of inclusion, ethnic polarization in the voting patterns. So I think, and the narrative, who controls the narrative? If PN makes any gains, they will try to say that they've won. But the bottom line is that they've set high bars for themselves, so they may not reach those.
All right. Yep, definitely. So it is definitely going to be a very interesting 6 hours to go. The polls are still open across all of the 6 states, as mentioned: Kelantan, Negeri Sembilan, Kedah, Terengganu, Selangor, as well as Penang. Do exercise your duty, your privilege as a Malaysian, as a registered voter, to go down. I have you. We'll see you guys again at 3 o'clock for another special edition of State Polls. Power to the people. My name is Meor Addelan, together with our beloved guests here. Let me just reintroducing them again. We have Dr. O.A. Sun, together with Dr. Bridget Welsh. Thank you so much for coming down, and we hope to see you later at 3 for another session of our show here. Again, have a good polling day. Go out and vote. See you again soon. Bye.